Welcome into 49ers Access. My name is Sterling Bennett, and we have some interesting news regarding the San Francisco 49ers trade deadline plans, which leads me to ask, are the San Francisco 49ers planning something massive at this year's November 5th NFL trade deadline? I know tomorrow is a massive game. San Francisco is 3-4. They're playing the Dallas Cowboys, massive rivalry, and we're all waiting the outcome of that game. And the outcome of that game could give us a clear indication as to what San Francisco does at this year's trade deadline, whether it's sell or buy. Maybe it's both. But according to the Athletic's Dianna Russini, we have a clear picture as to what the San Francisco 49ers are trying to do in regards to pushing their team, whether it's over the top to get a Super Bowl or at least make themselves better this year and potentially in the future, 24, 25, 26, and beyond. As of this morning, it was reported by the Athletics' Mike Silver that the team is looking to acquire a wide receiver to replace Brandon Aiyuk, and they're also searching for another defensive tackle to add depth to a room already missing Javon Hargrave for the entire year, which he may or may not come back for the playoffs, depending on if San Francisco actually goes to the playoffs this year. Yetur Gross-Matos, he has not come back yet from injured reserve, and now Kevin Givens looks like he'll miss at least 4, maybe more weeks with an injury. So the question is, who are the San Francisco 49ers trying to acquire at this year's NFL trade deadline? According to Dianna Russini, the New England Patriots' defensive lineman Devon, Godchaux, and wide receiver Kendrick Bourne have been listed as possible targets for the San Francisco 49ers at this year's trade deadline. Now, many of you may not know exactly who those players are. Obviously, Kendrick Bourne is a known established name in San Francisco, having played here for a couple of years, but many people do not know who Devon Godchaux is. And I want to familiarize you with him in case San Francisco does trade for him this year. I see the comments in the YouTube chat. I'll get to those in 1 second, but I do want to talk about Kendrick Bourne first because we know him very well. He knows the system. He'd be an instant starter in this system, and he'd also make Kyle Shanahan feel comfortable. A lot of what I'm saying now about Kendrick Bourne is what I kind of said during the, receivers to replace Brandon Aiyuk podcast we already did earlier this week. The Patriots wouldn't save any money this year by trading Kendrick Bourne, but for a 5th-round pick, I can see San Francisco and the Patriots saying, okay, we can part ways with Bourne and have him go back to San Francisco. I can also wonder if San Francisco would be okay paying Bourne past this season. Right now, he does or is locked into a contract until 2026, but they can release him after this year and save $3.5 million. So Kendrick Bourne doesn't have to be a 3-year contract player. He can be a 1-year rental, if you will. And you can let him go next year once maybe Brandon Aiyuk is back, or you feel comfortable with Deebo and Jawan Jennings and Pearsall in his 2nd year, and Cowling as well involved in that conversation. It really just depends on how San Francisco feels about Pearsall and Cowling. This game against Dallas tomorrow will be a massive kind of, test, if you will, to see if those young players can step up. The Dallas Cowboys can't stop the run. They can't rush the passer. It's going to be a game where San Francisco's offense really should be able to find their footing and let these young wide receivers kind of, I don't want to say catch up to speed, but at least acclimate themselves to the offense and hopefully find their way into being not a major part, but a solid part of this offense. But Kendrick Bourne could give you that veteran piece to kind of help tide you over to getting Brandon Aiyuk back next season. But like Aiyuk's injury, we don't know what that'll look like, what the rehab process will be. He hasn't had surgery yet. His knee is still swollen. So it's a long process for him. Maybe Kendrick Bourne can kind of bridge that gap. Talking to Niner fans throughout the last week or so, whether it's Adam Thielen or it's Kendrick Bourne, many people do not want either one of those players. They want the explosive, the fast guys, which those players usually aren't being traded at this time. Like, you're not getting Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or, star players. You're getting, players on bad teams on relatively more expensive contracts that team says, you know what, we don't want that player anymore. Thus, Kendrick Bourne, Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen being available, amongst others in that conversation. But Kendrick Bourne may be San Francisco's favorite receiver because it will be the easiest transition into the offense. But that said, many of you in the YouTube chat are talking about, Bobo says here, go after Max Crosby and Vita Vea and give them Aiyuk if you have to. Look, Brandon Aiyuk's cap hit is like 40, or his dead cap hit is like $42 million this year. They're not trading for a wide receiver that's not going to play for 1 to 2 years possibly. I get they just lost Mike Evans and Chris Godwin for a large portion of this year, but the Raiders nor the Buccaneers are taking, I guess in a sense, damaged goods, at least in the next couple years, for one of their star defensive players. Fluffy Ninja asks here, is Max Crosby a possibility? I would still say no. Why would the Raiders trade a star edge rusher when they want to pair him with Christian Wilkins? I get they're not a great team. They've had a bad year. Aiden O'Connell's done or at least he's on IR this year, and you have Gardner Minshew, and they're a mess, right? They could fire Antonio Pierce, and the Raiders, really are kind of like, there are so many ties as to why they could trade a player like Max Crosby, but Max says he don't want to leave. And if you're the Raiders, you're not trading away your best defensive player because your team is falling apart offensively. What you do is you go, wow, we suck. Get a quarterback in the draft. What a great opportunity to walk into next year with Wilkins and Max Crosby and a young secondary and hopefully another year of this same regime. And then you get the quarterback in the room. That's the hope. It's not, let's trade away and rebuild. It's like, we're already rebuilding. Let's, power this thing into the future by getting that quarterback during next year's draft. So I wouldn't say Max Crosby's an option. Vita Vea certainly isn't an option. No one's taking Brandon Aiyuk. The Raiders would just never give the Niners anything. Like Papa J says here, the Raiders ain't giving San Francisco nothing. Similar to that conversation of Cooper Kupp. The Rams aren't giving San Francisco Cooper Kupp. Like that's never going to happen unless San Francisco is like, hey, do you want Fred Warner or do you want Nick Bosa? And then they'd say, well, of course we do. But San Francisco would never do that. That said, I do think that the Patriots, despite or other than Kendrick Bourne, could offer San Francisco something they desperately need this year in the form of Devon Godchaux. Now, he is going to be 30 years old this November, so he's not a spring chicken. He ain't a young guy, and trading him would cost the Patriots roughly $4 million this year, but he's on a 3-year contract. They get 2 of those years off the books. They can save some money, get a few draft picks maybe in return. And while they're in their rebuild with a new head coach, a new regime, a quarterback on his first-year contract as a rookie, and Drake May, that would make sense. They want to get out of that money. It was a contract given to him via a previous regime. They're terrible. They want to rebuild and push themselves further, get younger players in the system. Gotch is kind of an older player, almost being 30 years old this November. The one thing about that, though, despite being almost 30 years old, is that he has been extremely healthy. I think one part of the conversation Niner fans are having is, if you're going to trade for a veteran player, you better make sure they're durable. That was one of the reasons why San Francisco this offseason let Eric Armstead go. You bring in Malik Collins, who has been healthy all year long. You get Leonard Floyd, who's been healthy almost his entire career. But despite that, Hargrave's gone down. Gross Matos has gone down. Elliott has gone down. Givens is now gone. You have to find someone that can be durable, because if one more person goes down, your starting defensive line is Bosa, Floyd, Evan Anderson, and Malik Collins, which isn't the worst in the world, but it certainly isn't what it was supposed to be when you walked into this season. But Godchaux has played 17 games the last 3 seasons. That's 17 games each of the last 3 seasons. Hasn't missed a game thus far this year, so he's extremely durable, extremely healthy despite his age. And I think one thing about him is, when you point to where San Francisco has struggled this year defensively, although I do think many of the issues they have and what's cost them more games are offensively. You have seen teams like the Vikings with Tyson Chandler in that second half in Minnesota, the Kansas City Chiefs last week with Kareem Hunt and Carson Steele and Shamaje Perine and Patrick Mahomes at times, and even the Cardinals with James Conner. San Francisco's run defense has struggled to, even if they're in games late or they're leading late, their run defense gets tired and gets bored down. And then at the end of the game, it's like the floodgates have opened and teams are getting 6-7 yards a carry. And it's like, oh my God, we can't get off the field. Davin Godchaux can definitely fix that for you. He's not perfect, but when you look at what he's been able to do with New England, which is a terrible team, a relatively competent defense that doesn't really have all the pieces in place just yet. They have some pieces, but not all the pieces in place. But they are not a great defense, but they're still veteran-led that can get the job done. And Godchaux is one of those pieces. This year alone, he's got some heavy hands for sure. He's hard to move around on that defensive line, and he is one of the better run defenders in the NFL. Last year, he had 23 run stops as a rotational defensive piece. This year alone, through 7 games, so he played 17 games last year, played 7 games thus far this year, already 19 run stops. That is something San Francisco desperately needs on their defensive line. He would, like, when you look ahead at the San Francisco schedule, it's the Dallas Cowboys tomorrow, which are the worst run offense in football, 77 yards. They just activated Dalvin Cook. That's probably not going to help them too much, but you have the Buccaneers, you have the Bills and James Cook, the Packers and Josh Jacobs, the Rams and Kyren Williams, and the Cardinals again with James Conner. Not to mention, you have the Lions with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So you need that run stopper. If you look at the schedule upcoming, you're like, wow, like the run is going to be a pivotal reason as to why San Francisco wins or loses football games on that defensive side of the football. And while San Francisco's run defense hasn't been, again, terrible, it's been towards the bottom half of the NFL, and it's hurt them through 3 of their losses this year. Chiefs, Vikings, and Cardinals. And I think Godchaux, he's not going to cost you a 2nd-round pick or a 3rd-round pick. I think a 4th-round pick, maybe the Patriots are okay eating some money. And even if it costs you a 3rd-round pick, in San Francisco's case, you're already getting comp picks still this year from, I think, DeMeco Ryans and Rand Carthen. So they're going to be okay in that regard of giving away a 3rd-round pick. You'll get them back. And San Francisco's 3rd-round picks this year are likely going to be a little better in the comp picks they've gotten in the past and 3rd-round picks they've had in previous years. They're going to be probably towards the 20s instead of the 30s and 32s or 31s, if you will. But I don't think Godchaux would cost San Francisco too much in regards to what they would have to give up compensation-wise. The big question, as always, is money. Is how does San Francisco fit any player they acquire into the salary cap, knowing you have to pay Brock Purdy, Diamador Lenore. Maybe you want to bring back Aaron Banks, who's not been great this year, but 2nd-round pick. Shanahan likes to stick with his guys. Talanoa Hufanga is on his last year of his contract. Travarius Mooney-Ward, who probably isn't going to come back, but you never know if things turn themselves around. Dre Greenlaw's in the last year of his deal, so a lot of massive decisions have to be made in regards to money. So where does Godchaux fit in San Francisco's salary cap conversation? Well, they could cut him after this year, or excuse me, after next year, 2025, and they'd only take about a $3.3 million dead cap hit. So it's not going to crush them to acquire him and in 2 years' time trade him. Obviously, San Francisco could restructure his contract, but with the way San Francisco's defense is made up, where they have a higher paid Javon Hargrave, you just acquired Malik Collins. If you get Godchaux, then you have Givens and you have Yetur Gross-Matos and Jordan Elliott. There is, I think, if you acquire Godchaux from the Patriots, you open the door to a heavier conversation regarding the future of Javon Hargrave. And I think when you look at the way San Francisco's run or defense is made up, or was supposed to be made up this year, it was you have Hargrave and Collins, your 2 pass rushing defensive tackles on 1st and 2nd down, or maybe even on 3rd down. You mix in Jordan Elliott, your run defending defensive tackle. Obviously, Hargrave's gone. what you could do is you can pair Collins and Godchaux the next couple years and give you a run defending defensive tackle, a space eater, if you will, who's hard to move in Godchaux. Then you have your pass rushing defensive tackle next to him in Malik Collins, and you can let go, trading or cutting Javon Hargrave after June 1st next year, saving around $13 million. So there is a way San Francisco could actually acquire a starting defensive tackle and save roughly $10 million when you look at the money in regards to cutting and trading Godchaux and Hargrave. I think it makes sense. Hargrave was having a pretty good year this year, but he got hurt. He's not had a great couple years in San Francisco. Godchaux would give you an instant upgrade over Hargrave and Collins as run defenders, and you pair one of those two together with Godchaux, you should have a much improved defensive line for the price of maybe a fourth, if not a third-round pick, which wouldn't cost San Francisco at all. But that is one option for San Francisco. I like Davin Godchaux. I think he's a good player. He's a vet. I really think that stopping the run is going to be a massive thing for San Francisco if they want to make this push towards the playoffs. Obviously, San Francisco still wants to do so. They believe in themselves. Despite being in last place as of today in the NFC West, they believe they can make a run. Stopping the run would be a massive piece into getting on a run to hopefully go into the playoffs once again in 2024. We have some questions here. Papa J says, Sterling, what do you think about Brock Purdy not being able to call audibles? This is not a new conversation. This has been the case since Matt Ryan in Atlanta, and I'm sure in previous places Shanahan's been the offensive coordinator. It was the same with Dick Mullins and Beathard and Jimmy G and now Brock Purdy. It's just not what San Francisco does. I would point out that San Francisco's offense usually has those audibles, if you will, built into the play. So if they get a look, the play changes somewhat. Now, again, I'm not going to come out here and break it down for you entirely, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. I get from the outlook, it looks as if Shanahan doesn't trust the quarterback enough, which was certainly the case with Jimmy Garoppolo and at times Brock Purdy. But if you know the offense and how Shanahan operates, despite its frustrations, Shanahan will tell anybody, quarterback, star receiver, left tackle, that's going to be a future Hall of Famer, just trust the offense. Trust me. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Obviously, something like this becomes a problem when you're losing football games. When you're winning, nobody cares. But I think the bigger conversation that should be had is one that relates to the center and quarterback correlating or relaying the protections. That was one of my concerns going into the game against the Chiefs about Purdy and Jake Brendel and even Kyle Juszczyk at times shifting protections over. It cost San Francisco a couple times in that game against Kansas City this year, cost them last year in the Super Bowl. So I'm not shocked it's a conversation now, but I don't think that is a conversation that really should be focused on audibles offensively. Like, you're not changing the entirety of the play. It's about those minor tweaks. And I think one downfall of a Shanahan system, and one that I think Brock Purdy and Jake Brendel, who has been atrocious this year, need to get better on, is calling out protections, shifting your protections over to the weaker, strong side of the offensive line. Now, that hurt them against the Vikings, it hurt them against the Chiefs, and you're kind of waiting to see what teams like the Bills and Sean McDermott and teams like the Packers do this year, because those are teams that San Francisco, if they want to go deep in the playoffs or maybe the Super Bowl, are probably going to play against. So I don't think it's an audible conversation. I think it should be more of, Purdy and Brendel need to get better at calling out protections and shifting those over, because that's not Shanahan's job. That is the quarterback, center, and sometimes even Kyle Juszczyk's job to do so. That would go a long way into helping a Shanahan offense beat teams like a Spagnuolo's defense or a Brian Flores defense with the Vikings. But back to the potential massive trades San Francisco could be making. Well, I am someone that believes that San Francisco would be smart to acquire a Davin Godchaux or a Kendrick Bourne, knowing the price wouldn't be too high and the instant impact would help this year and maybe even beyond to fill voids left by Brandon Aiyuk. And maybe in the next couple of years, you can get rid of Javon Hargrave, get off that contract, and get a run-stuffing defensive tackle. But we have bigger news today brought to us by Dianna Russini from The Athletic, which she was cooking this morning on the Athletic app I was reading this on. It's that San Francisco is eyeing or has internally discussed trading or reacquiring defensive tackle from the Colts, DeForest Buckner, and Broncos defensive tackle, DJ Jones. Now, wow. Those were two names that at least one of those we didn't expect to hear this year. DJ Jones was one that I said would make sense for San Francisco at the trade deadline, depending on what San Francisco wanted to do. And look, it is worth pointing out that even though San Francisco has maybe internally talked about this, and it likely means that when you hear a team has internally talked about this stuff, that they've also made a phone call here or there of like, hey, how you guys feeling? Russini added to her report that despite San Francisco's internal interest to reacquiring DeForest Buckner and DJ Jones, that there's been no indication that the Colts or the Broncos are willing to move either player. And really, both those teams are vying for a playoff spot still. They're both above 500. So they want to kind of keep things together in the meantime. But I will say this. We'll dive into DeForest Buckner in a second, but it would be really ironic that they chose Eric Armstead, Jimmy Ward, and others over DeForest Buckner in 2020. Let him go for a first-round pick. Essentially, it was Buckner for Ward, Kinlaw, and Armstead. That was kind of the trade-off they made. It'd be pretty funny in the same season that they let Armstead go, they'd also reacquire DeForest Buckner. I think it'd be pretty funny, but I don't think it'd be the best move to make. We'll talk about if it's even possible or not, but I do want to hit on DJ Jones first. Of the two, Buckner or DJ Jones, I do think Jones makes a little more sense for what San Francisco is looking for this year. Jones is 29 years old. He's only signed through this season. So say they are tied to Hargrave or they're sold on the idea of next year it's Hargrave, Givens, Collins, Gross-Matos together and Jordan Elliott together. Like they're okay with the unit they have. They just want to get healthy. Jones makes sense to kind of have that come here for the second half of the season, push us forward, hopefully maximize us, then go get paid again by somebody else this coming off season. The Broncos could also save around $7 million by trading him. So if the Broncos in the next 2 weeks kind of fall apart before November 5th's deadline, maybe there's a way they would trade DJ Jones. I don't see it happening, unfortunately, for Niner fans. The Broncos are 4-3 this year, and they play the Panthers tomorrow. So it's likely going to be that they're 5-3 when it's all said and done on Sunday. And they're currently in the 5th spot in the AFC. So they're like 2 games behind the Chiefs for first place in the AFC West. Maybe Kansas City drops a few games here or there. If the Broncos can stay relatively competitive, you never know what can happen, albeit it's a long shot they win the AFC West. They're playing above the expectation they had this year. They are 4-3. They're above 500. Why would you trade assets away when you're winning football games and the asset can help you win more football games? That doesn't really add up to me. But in San Francisco's side of things, the homecoming story would be great. DJ Jones is back for 1 year. Everyone loves DJ Jones's barbecue sauce that he used to sell. And he would certainly help San Francisco's defensive line. He'd be along the lines of a Devon Godchaux, where he'd be next to Collins and Floyd and Bosa. He'd eat up space, be a better upgrade on the run defending side of things. Although in previous years, he has improved the pass rushing side of his game. So, it makes sense on San Francisco's side of things. The money adds up. There's no ties long term. The Broncos are kind of like, well, we don't need to trade him. We don't really have the incentive to trade him. I think because the Broncos are playing better football this year, I think it would cost San Francisco probably a higher draft pick, probably a 4th-round pick, maybe a 3rd-round pick to get DJ Jones. Maybe I'm overestimating the cost of defensive tackles this year. That's certainly possible, but I think a Devon Godchaux, who is sign through a few more years. The Patriots are terrible. They're in the gutter. They're rebuilding. He's 30 years old. It makes more sense to get him off their books than the Broncos to say, well, we'll save $7 million this year. It's like, well, why? You're 4-3. You're winning football games. Why would you trade away a player you ain't got to trade away? And you can always get a comp pick for him during the offseason. So San Francisco would have to almost pay up a little more to acquire DJ Jones, although the story's great. But that brings us to, what about DeForest Buckner? Now, DeForest Buckner is one that I get it. There's emotional ties to San Francisco. Fans have been bitter ever since that trade happened. The Javon Kinlaw pick didn't work. Armstead was good, albeit hurt a lot of times through his tenure. And fans were just like, why did we ever trade away DeForest Buckner? If you go on Twitter today or my Instagram, you can see people were like, should have never traded him anyways. And I understand that. I would have still made that move, albeit not picked Javon Kinlaw, but that's just me. I think San Francisco having Armstead and Ward for the next 3 years paid off for them, but not taking Tristan Wirfs or other people that could have helped you on the offensive line definitely hurt you, because Kinlaw was an absolute bust, although gave us some pretty good comedy on the YouTube app with Grant Cohn and whatnot. But there's emotional ties to Buckner because it's always going to be this theme of what could have been, right? Of, oh, if we had Buckner, we would have won 1, 2, 3 Super Bowls. Wow, we wouldn't have had this rotating piece of having to pay Hargrave and Armstead. You could have had Buckner, who was awesome, who was usually healthy, who is an all-pro and Pro Bowler every single year. But didn't happen. Fans are burned by that. They're angry at that. They'll never let that go. It'll go down as kind of one of the, from the fan emotional aspect, one of the worst trades in team history. But from the practical standpoint, was a pretty good trade for both teams. But there's history there. Buckner's 30 years old. He just got activated today from injured reserve. Had an ankle injury a few weeks back, but he's okay now. I guess he'll come back this Sunday, tomorrow. But forget the emotional side of things. Forget the injury for a second. What about money? Money's always going to be one of the most important things when you talk about making a trade. Salary cap matters, compensation matters, but it's always about looking forward to the future. Right now, it would cost the Colts $4 million to trade away DeForest Buckner. Already a red flag. Why would you do that? But in regards to cap hits, it would save them $52 million estimated the next 2 years. Maybe that's worth it for Chris Ballard and company in Indianapolis. They have a young quarterback and Anthony Richardson. Maybe they want to put that money elsewhere in the offense, whether it's receiver or linebackers or cornerbacks, whatever they want to utilize, or pay multiple guys up front instead of paying one guy up front. There is a way you can, I guess, make that make sense in your own mind and kind of buy into trading away one of your star defensive players who is almost 30 years old and aging. But this year doesn't make sense for the Colts to do so. They're also 4-3. They are tied with the Broncos for the 5th seed in the AFC playoff picture. So they're like, we're above 500. The Jaguars aren't very good. Teams that were supposed to be competent, like the Browns, aren't playing well. The Bengals are kind of wishy-washy this year. The AFC West, the Chargers are pretty mediocre. The Broncos are, although, playing better. How long can that last? We don't know. The Raiders are kind of dookie again, if you will. And the AFC East is a mess as well. The Dolphins are terrible because of the quarterback situation. The Jets have been really inconsistent. The Patriots are bad. So younger teams that maybe in previous years would sell off a player like Jones or Buckner for big money savings in future seasons are like, well, we can compete this year and make the playoffs, and our young quarterback can get experience, so let's keep our guys in house. So money-wise doesn't really make sense, but there is a way you can buy into that. But the way the Colts are playing, I can see Chris Ballard saying, no, let's add pieces rather than let's sell pieces away. But I do think that if the Colts want to get cheaper and maybe a little younger, I think the Niners, if they even want to start that conversation, let's say they're on the phone, it's Ballard and John Lynch, they're talking it out. That conversation doesn't start with, hey, what do you want for Buckner? It starts with, hey, how much money are you willing to eat so we can acquire DeForest Buckner? Now, that would mean San Francisco has to pay up a little bit. I would assume that costs San Francisco a second round pick, if not a second and more for DeForest Buckner. Is that really worth it when you're 3-4, currently in last place, albeit by a game in your own division? You've lost to the Rams and Cardinals. Like, is this the year you go all in getting back to DeForest Buckner? I would say no. I would not do that, but that would also be reliant on the Colts saying, yes, we'll eat $20 million. We'll eat a lot of money off the contract, which in that case might make things worth the while for the San Francisco 49ers. Not to mention, in that same contract, it's not just a massive deal, $52 million in cap hits the next 2 years, not including this season. It's talking about 2 more years, 2026, and I think it's 2020 or 2027, 2028. There's $10 million in void years money. So you're paying 4 years for DeForest Buckner, roughly around $62 million on your cap. That's not what you want. And obviously they can restructure stuff. They can move money around. If the Colts eat money, that could be a possibility for San Francisco. But we haven't even then talked about what it would really cost to acquire him, which would be a second round pick, if not more, for San Francisco. So it's like, I get there's emotional ties. Buckner would undoubtedly improve this defensive line a ton. He would give you an instant, all-pro player in the middle of that defensive line, next to Bosa, next to Collins, next to Floyd. He'd make everyone's life easier. It'd be a great story. He would get a massive cheer coming out of that tunnel for the first time again. He's got 62 and a half career sacks. He's gotten over 60 tackles a year almost every year of his career. So he's a massive force in the middle of that field. He would help San Francisco immensely. He would almost make San Francisco's defensive line feared again, where now it's like, there's Nick Bosa, who's an all-pro defensive player of the year. Let's triple team him. And they're forcing players like Givens and Collins and Devon Anderson to win their jobs 1v1, which they're not doing for the most part. So it would definitely make San Francisco's defensive line ferocious and attacking and swarming, if you will, on the quarterback and make Nick Bosa's life a lot easier. But I do think financially, kind of like we talked about with Godchaux and Bourne and DJ Jones, more so than all three of those guys almost combined. Like if San Francisco traded for all three of those guys, DeForest Buckner's money would financially break them more than all three of those contracts combined. It's just a hard thing to bring into your cap middle of the year, redo a contract. It doesn't feel like that the bridge was burned by them. They both understood, hey, this has to happen for the betterment of both of us. You can get paid. We can get 3 players under contract and keep things together. Maybe there is something, though. Dianna Russini also talked about that San Francisco could field offers for Charvarius Ward, that there could be a few teams that are interested in trading for him. We talked about that maybe earlier this week, maybe last week, about that. If San Francisco continue to lose his games, maybe they sell one piece, allow Renardo Green to start the rest of the year. Gatum's still there for one more year. So they would save roughly $9 million by trading away Charvarius Ward. Maybe trading away Ward and utilizing that now freed $9 million to get DeForest Buckner might make some sense. But even then, people forget about this a lot, when they want to get stars and be aggressive and go all in and get that guy and this guy and that guy. Like, that sounds great when you're playing Madden and, whatnot. But like, it's not just go and get that guy. To one, it takes 2 teams to tango, right? But it's money financially. And the reason why San Francisco redid McCaffrey's contract, redid Deebo's contract, redid Hargrave's contract, redid Kittle's contract, and extended Trent Williams and redid his contract too, was because they wanted to carry over as much cap as possible. As of right now, they have like $52 to $54 million in cap space. They got to carry over as much as they humanly possibly can. So I have a hard time believing they'll pay up big for a premier player unless they are given, like, with certainty that player is going to lower his cap hit for the next 3 or 4 years, like DeForest Buckner. Maybe they extend him instead of, paying those void years. But even then, it's like, do you want to have a 34-year-old defensive player that you don't know is going to be healthy? Like, that to me is like you're putting yourself in the exact same position you are now with Hargrave. And even Eric Armstead last year. You have a guy who's nearing or around 30 years old, you're paying big money to, that you're tied to now for the long haul until he's 34, 35 years old. And now he's hurt again. Now, Buckner's been relatively healthy almost his whole career, very durable, but why would you not trade for a player that wasn't on IR this year? Like Devon Godchaux, who'd be a lot cheaper, a good run defender, instant upgrade. You have him for a relatively cheap contract the next 2 years after this season. And wouldn't cost you a first, second round pick. And there'd be like no money tied to him whatsoever. To me, that makes a lot more sense than DeForest Buckner, but I know fans out there were like, bring me Defo. I need to have Defo back. But like Bobo says here, it'll cost you a first, second round pick at best. Like, is that worth, like, by trading for DeForest Buckner, which I get it, emotional ties, you are risking and gambling the future of this roster. Now, Bobo says here on the YouTube chat that they hope Brock Purdy takes the Tom Brady route, minimal contract, lower pay, and uses the endorsements he's making as his higher salary, if you will. That sounds fine and dandy. And I get that Brock feels, very humble and kind of has that, I'm a team player kind of vibe, which he certainly is. That said, if Brock Purdy wasn't the last pick of the draft in 2022, I mean, he's already had the cheapest possible contract for a drafted player in NFL history in regards to how great he's been playing. Why would he do that? Why would he ever be like, nope, I'll take a cheaper deal? Now, we're talking about like $65 million compared to $40 million, which is insane money per year, mind you. But for Brock, it's like, no, I've given you my best on my cheapest. Now give me your best as I hopefully can maintain my best. I have a hard time believing now Brock may not get 65, but people didn't think Jimmy G was worth like the 40 he got when he got at the time. So I would assume Brock resets the market at some place around Dak Prescott's contract simply because that's the rate for quarterbacks nowadays. But I would have no problem with Brock making that money simply because he's made nothing essentially for 3 years now. But that said, we have a great comment here by Papa J that maybe trading for DeForest Buckner by using a second or first round pick might actually be worth it, knowing San Francisco doesn't usually draft well in those 2 rounds. I get that. I totally understand that train of thought. Now, you have your Bosas, your Deebos, you have, hopefully this year it's Ricky Pearsall, Renardo Green, and you have Brandon Aiyuk. But for every one of those guys, you have your Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster and Mike McGlinchey, and you have Javon Kinlaw and whatnot, and Trey Lance. My God. So I think that while I get it, they've been burned by those. I think you always have to look at where this team's trajectory is. And I think if San Francisco was 5-2, we're all like, yes, you have these critical issues, whether it's offense or defensive. Well, let's say they're 5-2 and they lose to the Chiefs, and then they, lose Brandon Aiyuk for the year. Go get a receiver. Go pay up big for Deontay Johnson or whoever else you like out there. Yep, go all in. You maximize this year. But because they're 3-4, it's like you want to almost, yes, pay to win now, but you want to give yourself the option to either, one, get out of a contract next year during the offseason, or you want to pay up to win now and for the future. And I think that's the issue with the DeForest Buckner idea, is that not only are you taking on a massive contract, which you'd have to, lose more players than you're already scheduled to lose during the offseason. You'd also, blow your entire, carryover cap this year, and you'd lose that second round pick where in your mind, you're like, well, we already have to pay Brock and Hufanga and Greenlaw and Banks and whoever else you want to add in that group, sure. But you want to have that second round pick. Like the Niners right now are feeling the weight of not having those 3 first-round draft picks because they picked Trey Lance. Now, who knows where those picks were going to be, and who knows exactly who they would have picked, but I can guarantee you right now San Francisco's like, damn, like if only we had those 3 first-round picks back, you'd have more insulation, you have a better defensive line most likely, you wouldn't have to deal with, well, Drake Jackson's knee injury is a problem, like, no one's contributing, you wouldn't have to pay up big money for guys like Hargrave or Floyd or whatnot. So, I get that you're saying, oh, they kind of suck in the first and second rounds anyway, so go get an established player again. I understand that, but right now San Francisco's like, we wish we had that first and second round pick back. I guarantee you San Francisco is like, wow, can we get that third round pick back for Trey Lance? My God, he was terrible. But that's where things sit now. The San Francisco 49ers have internally talked about reacquiring DeForest Buckner and DJ Jones, and it was said by Dianna Russini of The Athletic that the New England Patriots might be the best place to target players if you are the San Francisco 49ers, namely Kendrick Bourne, who San Francisco already had interest in during the offseason when they were kind of going to trade Brandon Aiyuk but didn't. Then, of course, Devon Godchaux, who would be a run-stuffing, strong-handed, heavy-handed defensive lineman to help lift up this defense that, I wouldn't say desperately needs it, but for the long haul, because they have so many guys dropping like flies, this move makes sense for now, this year, and tomorrow, which I think is the moves they have to make. Obviously, if the record was better, you go pay for Calais Campbell. You'd add these, ancillary one-year hit pieces to help you. But this year, it's like, because you've underperformed, you have to build not just for this year. It's going to be for the long haul, a couple years down the road. And you look at the contracts we talked about in previous years, like receivers, for example. People hate this conversation, but it's like Adam Thielen makes sense because it's not a one-year contract. You can get out of it, sure, but you can have him under contract for a year or two. Kendrick Bourne makes sense because he's under contract for a few years. And if Aiyuk isn't back next year, then you have a veteran piece mixed in with the rookies and Juwan Jennings and Deebo Samuel for one more year. So it's like, you can't just think about now. You got to think about 2025 and 26, which Buckner doesn't make financial sense or draft compensation sense to do that. I get it's great. He's a great player. We love him here. Maybe some of you were saying, I wish he never got traded. I get it. It sucked to see him go, but San Francisco's kind of in a spot where they can't even afford to take him back. They need to work on, and their strategy this year at the trade deadline shouldn't be, let's get big stars. It really should be, how do we improve this team this year, next year, and in 2026? That's why Bourne, Thielen makes sense receiver-wise. Devon Godchaux makes sense. Defensively, I think Arden Key would make some sense. Jadeveon Clowney makes sense because those guys are either on cheap one-year deals where they're not going to hurt you financially, or they're on like fresh 2 or 3 year deals to be able to stick around for a couple of years in time. Those guys make a lot of sense to me. Like if I were to put together the perfect trade deadline for San Francisco, it would be, Devon Godchaux, run stuffing defensive tackle. It would be maybe like a Maurice Hurst, a depth piece, the fourth guy, because everyone's currently hurt for you on the interior. He wouldn't cost you much, like a 7th or 6th round pick maybe. He'd be a body who you already had in camp a couple years ago, getting like an Adam Thielen or a Kendrick Bourne to help insulate you for a year or two at the wide receiver position. That would also make some sense. Then you add on, we're getting back Christian McCaffrey in 2 weeks' time, hopefully, and Dre Greenlaw and you're getting back John Feliciano soon, and maybe you get Gross Matos back, and you go, okay, like things are starting to round into shape, and but I sneakily feel like San Francisco believes like, nope, we believe in this team. Like their motto isn't let's, like they are completely bought into this team. And I get they kind of have to be, unfortunately, because of the way the year's gone, it kind of, jades that. But they feel like they can win this year, that if they make a few tweaks, get their guys back who are already on the roster, Christian McCaffrey mainly, that they'll make a run, which can certainly happen. Like no one's denying that is not a possibility, but it's like, what are the odds that happens knowing the way that the year has gone so far? So I think the first step is we have to see what happens tomorrow with the Dallas Cowboys. If San Francisco wins that game, maybe you pay up for a piece. If they lose that game, though, when you're 3-5 going into the bye week, it's just me. I would trade away Charvarius Ward, free up that $9 million, go still get Devon Godchaux, go get your defensive tackle who can be here for the next few years and give you some stability. Maybe they target a receiver still, although at that point in time, you kind of want to get Pearsall and Cowing up to speed as fast as you possibly can. But even then, you can have a conversation of like, God, like, would I rather freaking get rid of Ronnie Bell and just get Thielen and pay up for Deontay Johnson if it means getting Ronnie Bell off the roster? I ain't opposed to that at all. So, like, there's a lot of routes to take. But Papa J has a question on the YouTube chat saying, Sterling, do you see Juice getting more or less than 5 carries against the Cowboys? I see him getting less, mainly because Jordan Mason is seemingly fully healthy. And the Dallas Cowboys have, I think, the 798th ranked run defense since 2000, which is like dead last. So it's not great at all for them. And they're not going to have 4 of their starting defensive end players. Micah Parsons ain't going to play. DeMarcus Lawrence ain't going to play. Sam Williams ain't going to play. Marshawn Nealon's not going to play. Like, this is a team where, and even, I think it's Mozzie Smith, their first-round pick a handful of years ago. He's terrible. He can't stop a brick freaking house. The semi-truck runs through him every single week. You can't rush the passer. This is a game where I think San Francisco, kind of like that Seahawks game, runs the football effectively. Even with Grendo or Patrick Taylor Jr., like they should be able to run all over the Dallas Cowboys, which sets up the play action and whatnot. But if you want to hear my full breakdown on that game, I did a podcast 2 days ago on this very channel. So you can look at everything I said in regarding to what San Francisco's game plan can be or should be facing the Cowboys tomorrow, which I think that game does hinge on, or San Francisco's trade deadline planning hinges on what they do tomorrow against the Dallas Cowboys. They're at home. They're wearing their throwbacks. Hopefully it's a get right game. You're 4-4. If they win, you're 3-5 if they lose. But right now, at least what we know, San Francisco's not playing the wait and see game. They want to get a star in the building, whether it's DJ Jones or a big fish like DeForest Buckner back. They're shooting for the stars at the trade deadline. Will tomorrow's win or loss change that or push them further towards that mindset? I'm hoping even if they win, they are smart. There's no reason to rush into anything and pay up big for anybody. You can get cheap, effective pieces for the next 1 to 2 years. That is what San Francisco should do. If you're going to pay for a player that's on a 1-year deal, go get Calais Campbell. If you're the Giants, maybe like there's always conversations of like, could they do like a 2-player trade where it's like you get Darius Slayton from the Giants and Ajalari from the Giants. And it's like, yeah, probably for a 3rd-round pick. Like both those players probably go for like a 5th, right? Maybe you get them for a 3rd, which I wouldn't do that deal, but that's just me. Or you go to the Patriots and you get Bourne and Godchaux and you're like, wow, here's a 4th, 5th-round pick for both these guys. Cool, take it, great. And then you're like, wow, they got 2 players for the price of 1. But you have to win tomorrow to even get there. You win tomorrow, get to the bye week, hopefully get your guys back. It gives you a week and a half to roughly kind of see what's out there and what's going to happen. But you've seen teams like the Bills get Amari Cooper, the Chiefs get DeAndre Hopkins, the Seahawks got Ernest Jones, the fourth from the Titans, who was with the Rams earlier this year. So there is also kind of like, you win tomorrow, get on the phones, start calling teams. What's out there? You're almost begging for the Broncos, the Colts, and the Patriots to continue to lose, the Dolphins to continue to lose, because if they continue to lose and they're like, well, season's over, then San Francisco kind of gets this easier road to acquiring a star player or the player they want to get via trade. But that's all I have for you today. What do you think San Francisco should do at the trade deadline? Are you all in? Chips on the table. Go get DJ Jones despite the cost. Go get DeForest Buckner despite the cost. What do you think San Francisco should do at the trade deadline? Are you more conservative like myself, saying no, Adam Thielen, Kendrick Bourne, Devon Godchaux, those guys make a little more sense for where this team currently sits? Tell me down below in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave that 5-star review on the audio podcasting platforms. And if you kindly could, follow us on social media at 49ers_access is the X or Twitter. 49ers.access is the Instagram. And if you want to watch your Niners play this year, go to SeatGeek.com and use our promo code 49ersaccess. It'll save yourself $20 off your first purchase. Thank you to Papa J, to Bobo, and many others. Rob D, Fluffy Ninja in the YouTube comments. You guys are awesome. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Enjoy tomorrow's Niner and Dallas Cowboys game. And hopefully tomorrow night, when we go live to instantly react to that one, we are talking a victory for the San Francisco 49ers. But my name is Sterling Bennett. And as always, stay faithful.